Hello and welcome. This course will cover the basics of conducting and documenting an initial behavioral and skills assessment. Before we get started, I wanted to take a minute to introduce myself and cover some quick housekeeping points. My name is Amelia Delphonse. I co-founded Master ABA with my sister Diana Kelly to help make resources available to the professionals in our field. Our focus is on ethical, compassionate, client-centered practices. We offer a ton of free resources, including a blog and free courses. You can find these resources on masteraba.com and masteraba.academy. This course makes no assumptions about your prior experience with initial assessments, so there might be information here that you already know. This information is included because it answers many of the questions I have received from new BCBAs. If it's information you already know, make a note to share it with the BCBAs or candidates whom you supervise or mentor. What feels like common sense after conducting assessments on your own for a while is totally mystifying to new BCBAs. I'm sure you can remember how that felt. You can download course notes and transcripts, as well as workbooks, checklists, and other helpful resources in the Resources tab. You can earn 1.5 general CEUs for this course, but you must watch the video all the way to the end. Throughout the video, I will provide you with code words. Write these words down because you will need to submit them in the quiz to receive your certificate. I'm on camera now to say hi, but I will be behind the scenes for the rest of the video. I live in Tampa near the airport with 2 dogs, my husband, and my daughter, so it can get a bit noisy and distracting at my house, as our members who come to office hours can attest to. I will spare you all this chaos by going off camera. You can reach out with questions at any time via email at support@masteraba.com. Let me introduce you to our main character, you. This course is designed to help you master the skills you need to do your job effectively and efficiently. Without you, we wouldn't be here. I'm so glad you're here. Now let's get started. You passed the exam and secured your dream job. Then the doubt sets in. You don't know how to actually do any of the things that you learned in school. If this sounds like you, you're not alone. Despite fieldwork experience, many new BCBAs feel unprepared to perform the duties of a BCBA. Some agencies offer mentorship for new BCBAs, but the reality for clinical work, especially for insurance-funded services, is there just isn't enough time or resources to offer the support that they actually need. If you have never assisted with an initial assessment or you're curious about how others conduct them, this video will cover the process from after the approval for the initial assessment to writing the documentation for the assessment. There are more steps to the process than we have time to cover here. Courses that cover the full process, including writing a behavior intervention plan, choosing meaningful skill acquisition goals, and writing the final treatment plan, are available in the Master ABA Dojo. I will add a link in the Resources tab so you can learn more about our membership if you find this video helpful. All right, so let's jump in. To keep this simple, let's make the following assumptions. The learner demonstrates maladaptive behaviors that interfere with functioning. The learner's insurance company approved the request for the initial assessment. The learner's caregivers have completed paperwork providing some basic background information. And the learner has a scheduled appointment for the assessment. The main purpose of the initial assessment is to determine medical necessity for insurance-funded services and to develop a plan for treatment. It provides an opportunity to establish a relationship with the learner and caregivers. It lays the groundwork for the future of ABA services by offering you a chance to show the caregivers their role in services. It's a critical step in an ABA program. There are 2 main components of an initial assessment. First is the behavioral assessment, and the other part is the skills assessment. Although you will often gather information for both components at the same time, and they are interrelated, it's helpful to think of them somewhat separately. Each component has a slightly different process and workflow. First, I'm going to go through the steps of the behavioral assessment, and then we will talk about the skills assessment. Usually you will collect data for both components at the same time, but it's possible you might be asked to conduct just one of these components depending on your role. Your assessment work begins well before the day of the scheduled assessment. The more prepared you are for the assessment, the smoother it's likely to go. Keep in mind that you have to stay flexible because unexpected situations inevitably pop up. Here are the most important things to do to get ready for the assessment. Review records and documentation such as intake forms, diagnostic assessments, or the IEP to gain a sense of the learner's behaviors and potential skill deficits. Gather materials such as questionnaires, assessment books, paper and pens, exciting toys and materials that allow for probing skills such as picture books, photo cards, sorting toys, etc. Color-coding data sheets or note paper to indicate behavioral or skill assessment notes helps you organize your data. Sticky tabs on different data sheets help you find the form you need quickly. Choose a behavioral assessment method. We're going to talk about that in a few minutes. And choose your skill assessment. We will talk about that in the skill assessment course. Prepare the environment, if it's available, by sprinkling the room with interesting items, removing distractions, and putting some potential favorites in sight but out of reach. Assessments often don't go as planned. The documentation you reviewed might paint a picture of the learner that doesn't align with what you see on the day of the assessment. To account for this, consider developing contingency plans. For example, if the learner demonstrates more communication skills than you expected, what extra materials might you need? If the learner resists engaging with you or responding to questions, what will you do? How will you react if the learner engages in risky behavior? Spend some time visualizing an ideal assessment, then consider what you will do when different pieces don't go as you planned. As you gain experience, you naturally become better at adjusting the methods to meet the needs of the new learners. Each situation is different, but here are some ideas for contingency plans to get you started. Switch to a different assessment or jump to a different level in the chosen assessment. Ask another BCBA or the director for backup if you're in a clinic, or ask the parent to show you how they respond to risky behavior. Use images from Google Images on your cell phone. Ask the parent to probe a skill or encourage the learner to participate. Pair with the learner and schedule a follow-up assessment. Ask the parents to collect baseline behavioral data if the learner does not engage in challenging behavior during the assessment. Try to think of other situations that might come up during the initial assessment. This will help you feel prepared when things don't go as planned. The beginning of the assessment is your chance to set the stage not only for the assessment but also for ongoing ABA services and parent training. Allow up to 15 to 30 minutes for this part of the assessment to ensure time to answer questions the parents have. This step provides the opportunity for you to observe how the parents interact with the learner. Ask questions about the learner's skills or behaviors. Discuss the parent's role in ABA services. Review any questionnaires you want to have them complete. And build a rapport with the parents. Take time here. Avoid the inclination to sweep the learner off and jump into the assessment. During this time, let the parents and caregivers know what to expect during the assessment. Some parents don't know which questions to ask, so anticipate as many relevant questions as you can. Answer questions such as, how long will the assessment take? What will you do during the assessment? Can the parents be in the room during the assessment? What will the parents do while you assess the learner's skills? What should the parents do if the learner runs to them or engages in challenging behavior? Under what conditions might the assessment end early? When should parents complete the questionnaires given to them? Will there be follow-up appointments? And what happens after the assessment? Most parents coming in for an assessment have already been through several appointments and assessments, but each one is a little different. Avoid assuming the parents know what to expect or do. You might feel tempted to create an FAQ handout to expedite the step, but this conversation builds the foundation for your relationship with the parents. Don't cut corners. Finally, let parents know how they can find you if they need you. And now it's time to begin the main event. The success of any ABA program you develop depends on accurately identifying the function of concerning behavior. Conducting a behavioral assessment requires the following steps. Choose an assessment method. Define target behaviors. Conduct indirect assessments, including records review, questionnaires, and interviews. Conduct direct assessments, including observations and data collection, data analysis, and documenting the assessment. ABA offers several options for directly assessing the occurrence of behavior. In addition to direct assessment methods, nearly all situations require some form of direct assessment, either a descriptive assessment or an analysis. A descriptive assessment, FBA, observes and measures the occurrence of target behaviors but does not manipulate environmental conditions. A functional analysis, FA, changes environmental variables and then measures the resulting behavior change. There are three primary methods for assessing the function of challenging behavior: the functional behavior assessment, FBA, functional analysis, FA, and the practical functional analysis. There are a few variations of these methods, including informant-based assessments and brief functional analysis, but the previously mentioned three options are the assessments you will hear most about. These assessments produce results that vary in both their reliability and their intrusiveness. A functional behavior assessment, or FBA, is the most common type of assessment used in applied settings, and the one we will go into detail about in this video. According to a survey conducted by Oliver Pratt and Normand, 2015, 90% of the 724 BCBAs who responded to their survey reported using FBA procedures. Of those BCBAs that responded, fewer than half reported using functional analysis, or FA, procedures. In fact, most of the respondents selected never or almost never to questions related to their use of FAs to identify the function of behaviors. I will link to this article in the References tab if you're interested in reading it. The article is both interesting and validating, since FAs are often considered the gold standard for identifying the function of maladaptive behavior. Reasons why BCBAs choose not to utilize FAs varies from insufficient time and resources to ethical concerns about placing learners in contrived, stressful situations for the sake of precision, when other methods might yield satisfactory results. Dr. Greg Hanley developed the Practical Functional Analysis, or PFA, that combines critical elements of both assessment methods. This methodology attempts to identify all the possible maintaining variables. Behavior is complex and rarely controlled by a single function. Consider this example. There is a meeting scheduled at work that you absolutely don't want to attend. Your presence brings no value to the meeting, and you suspect they won't even notice if you didn't show up. You decide to skip the meeting and stay home until your scheduled supervision sessions later in the afternoon. What is the function of your staying home behavior? Based on the information provided, you can easily assume that you engaged in the behavior to escape the meeting. Simple, right? This is where traditional methods for identifying behavioral function stops, but remember, behavior is complex. In this example, what did you do when you stayed home? Did you exist in a vacuum of task avoidance? In reality, you probably escaped to a more preferred task or activity. Maybe you spent some time on social media or had coffee with a friend. Maybe you stayed home and binged your favorite show on Netflix. Whenever you engage in an escape behavior, you almost always escape to something else. When collecting your ABC data, make sure to note specific items or activities that a learner escapes from and what they escape to. The reverse is also true. When a learner engages in maladaptive behavior to access something, they often also end up escaping something else. Include all this data in your analysis. This information allows for more precision in your analysis and plan development. This chart shows some important advantages and disadvantages of the different assessment methods. A functional analysis is more accurate and demonstrates predictive control. It's considered the gold standard for identifying function. It requires extensive training and supervised experience to implement correctly. With a functional analysis, you risk reinforcing undesired behavior, and you must place the learner in potentially stressful situations to evoke behavior. A functional behavior assessment is easier to implement since information is gathered from a variety of sources. It's a more efficient process in some circumstances, and you avoid potentially reinforcing dangerous behavior. It's also a less accurate method of identifying function since you don't demonstrate control over the behavior, and you can only formulate a hypothesis of the function. The practical functional analysis demonstrates control of the behavior by testing out a hypothesis formed through indirect assessment methods. It minimizes but doesn't eliminate the risk of placing the learner in potentially stressful situations by only testing control over the behavior in the identified condition rather than testing it across all possible conditions. And finally, training for this method is not provided in most graduate programs, so individuals need to seek out training on their own. Before you begin collecting any data, you must define the target behaviors. You may need to adjust or clarify your definitions over the course of your assessment as you get to know the learner better. But you must know what you're looking for before you collect data. The information for this definition initially comes from your review of records and any conversations you have with stakeholders, such as parents, teachers, or other caregivers. The operational definition should include a specific description of the behavior along with at least 2 examples and non-examples. Here's an example of an operational definition. Flopping. Any instance in which Julian's body goes limp, resulting in his body kneeling or lying flat on the floor. Examples include falling to his knees while walking in the hallway, moving from standing to lying flat on the floor when given a directive by an adult. Non-examples include lying on the floor in the motor room as part of a game he is playing, and kneeling on his mat at circle time. If you need more practice with operational definitions, we offer a free course, which I will link to in the resources section. To get the information you need to define the behaviors of most concern during the initial interviews when speaking with parents, teachers, or other caregivers, ask them the following questions. What behaviors are you most concerned about? Can you describe what it looks like when he or she engages in X behavior? Can you provide examples of what happens when he engages in X behavior? Can you think of examples when someone doesn't know him well, might think he's engaging in the behavior, but he's actually not? For example, Johnny is not hitting when he attempts to give you a high five but misses and his hand makes contact with your face. These questions should be enough to get you started. Avoid the temptation to collect data on every challenging behavior the learner engages in. Try to limit the number of behaviors to no more than 4. Focus on those behaviors that were identified as most concerning. If you try to collect data on everything, you're likely to miss factors that impact the high priority behaviors. Indirect assessments refer to a method of gathering information without directly interacting with or observing the learner. The information is gained through the people who know the learner well in a variety of different environments and situations. They provide an easy and less time-consuming way to collect information about the learner's behavior. This information is far less reliable than information obtained through direct assessment. Indirect assessment methods are most valuable when used to narrow the focus of your direct assessment. Indirect assessments include parent, caregiver, or stakeholder interviews, questionnaires such as the QABF, FAST, or MAS, and rating scales like the Vineland Adaptive Behavior Scales 3. Indirect assessments help identify physiological or medical factors that influence behavior, common setting events, antecedents, and consequences, potentially relevant skill deficits, and a history of interventions tried in the past. When conducting an interview, it's important to allow space for the interviewee to share information freely. Parents may feel embarrassed or judged by their child's behavior or their response to the behavior. Ask open-ended questions and pause to allow time for the interviewee to think about the answer. Ask enough questions to get useful information, but not so many that the interviewee feels overwhelmed. Here are some questions to get you started. Don't worry about writing them all down. You can download the interview questionnaire in the resources section. Background questions include, what is the reason for the FBA? What are the learner's strengths? What are the learner's language abilities? How does the learner occupy his or her time? What are the learner's favorite things? What are the learner's most concerning behaviors? What do these behaviors look like? Are any of these behaviors potentially dangerous? If yes, please explain why. Does the learner have any medical or psychological conditions that might contribute to the occurrence of the behavior? If yes, please explain. And does the learner take medication that might have side effects that contribute to the occurrence of the behavior? If yes, please explain. Context questions for the interview include, are there circumstances in which the behaviors always occur? If yes, please explain. Are there circumstances in which the behaviors never occur? If yes, please explain. Does the behavior occur only or more often during specific activities? If yes, please explain. Does the behavior occur only or more often at specific times of the day? If yes, please explain. Does the behavior occur only or more often in specific locations? If yes, please explain. Does the behavior occur only or more often in the presence of specific people? If yes, please explain. If you need to make the behavior occur, what would you do? If you needed to make the behavior stop, what would you do? What has been done in the past to help change the behavior? And what other information might be helpful in understanding the behavior? These questions pull relevant information from the interviewee without leading them to make false assumptions about the answers you're looking for. Use this information to guide your direct assessments. Are there activities or times of day that provide the best opportunities to observe the behavior occurring naturally? What safety concerns might arise during the assessment that you should be prepared for? A descriptive assessment observes and measures the occurrence of target behaviors, but does not manipulate environmental conditions. The type of data you collect will vary depending on your chosen assessment method. Observing a behavior occur is an important step to determining the function. Relying on the reports of others often leads to inaccurate outcomes. When behavior does not occur during the assessment, it's time to get creative. Consider asking families to place a video recorder in the room where the learner spends the most time and try to capture the behavior that way. The family should trim the recording to remove any personal or irrelevant moments. Since the FBA is the most commonly used assessment, the rest of the video will primarily refer to this assessment method. If you feel an FA would be a better choice for your learner and you need support with it, seek supervision from an experienced BCBA. When collecting data for your FBA, it's best to schedule multiple observations if possible. Try to schedule the observations during times the learner often engages in the target behaviors. If you're conducting a full initial assessment, you can collect some of this data during the skills assessment, especially if elements of the assessment process, such as demands and restricted access to desired items, trigger behavior. One of the most important types of data you collect is the ABC data. An open-ended ABC data sheet like the one in the example here allows you to describe exactly what happened and what the behavior looked like. The major disadvantage to this type of data sheet is the time it takes to document, then analyze what happened. While you might have time during some assessments, some learners will make this task very difficult. An alternative is to use a data sheet like the one here that includes checkboxes for common antecedents, behaviors, and consequences. This allows you to quickly record and tally each of the variables. The major drawback to this data sheet is the lack of specificity. Consider including an additional column for notes or numbering the rows so you can make corresponding notes on a notepad. No matter how you collect ABC data, you must be able to categorize the antecedents and consequences during your analysis. When you write long narratives in your ABC data sheets, this becomes challenging. In addition to ABC data, you must also collect data about how often or how long behavior occurs. This is the frequency, rate, or duration of the target behavior. You will need these data to serve as baseline in your behavior treatment plan. Once you have collected your data, it's time to analyze it. Data for an FBA comes from at least 3 sources. This ensures an adequate sample of the behavior to build confidence in your diagnosis of the function of the behavior. Most commonly, your data will come from a review of existing records, including incident reports from school, indirect assessments, and finally your direct observation. The data you collect during the observation or the descriptive assessment connects with the indirect assessment data to help you form a hypothesis. The process of analyzing the data is easiest to learn by breaking it down into smaller steps. Yep, just like a task analysis. First, graph ABC data in a bar graph. Score and graph data from questionnaires. Enter data in a scatterplot if needed. Complete the problem behavior pathway, and then complete the competing behavior pathway. Don't worry, we're going to look more closely at each step in just a minute. As you analyze the data, take the time to look for patterns. Consciously consider any bias that might influence your diagnosis. Bias in data analysis is common and significantly impacts the results of your analysis. The table here shows some of the most common types of bias that arise during data analysis. First, we have confirmation bias. This type of bias highlights data that supports your predetermined conclusion. Here's an example. The learner's mother believes he engages in the behavior for attention, and you find data that supports that belief. Another type of bias is selection bias, which occurs when data are collected subjectively, leading to misrepresentation. Here's an example. Only collecting data that's easy to access. For example, interviewing the learner's mother, but not his father who lives at home. Outliers is a type of bias that occurs when there are data that are much higher or lower than other data. Here's an example. You conduct 3 observations, and during one 5-minute incident at home, the learner engaged in 20 acts of aggression, which is 5 times as many as occurred in the total of the rest of the observations combined. Confounding variables are variables that are outside the scope of the analysis that influence the data. Look at this example. The learner's siblings come home at 4 p.m. during the observation, and at the same time his mother tells him to turn the TV off, and the learner engages in aggression. Assuming cause-effect relationship between the arrival of the siblings and the learner's behavior is a bias of confounding variables. And finally, the last type of bias we will talk about is information bias. This occurs when information is missing or misclassified. Here's our last example. When analyzing ABC data, you classify the consequence. Learner's mother removed the iPad from the learner's hand as attention and disregard the removal of the item. The best way to avoid bias is by being aware that it may exist. Question assumptions you make when analyzing the data. Are there other ways to interpret the data you're analyzing? Before we move on, I'm going to give you your first code word, and that is process. Again, your first code word is process. Write this down because you're going to need it for the quiz to earn your CEUs. The first step to analyze the data you collected is to graph it. ABC data should be graphed in a bar graph like the one pictured here. Graph setting events, if collected, antecedents, and consequences on separate graphs, as the x-axis will be different for each. To get to this graph, begin by creating general categories for the setting events, antecedents, and consequences. Then tally each one that you recorded. Here are some examples of common categories for each. Common setting events include being hungry, tired, having a specific person present, a specific person being absent, and a change in medication. Common antecedents include demands, items restricted, attention restricted, unstructured time, and transitions. And finally, common consequences include escaped the demand, a reprimand, discussion, the item being removed, and ignoring the behavior or restricting attention. Next, you will need to score and graph data from any questionnaires you gave to parents or caregivers. There are several commonly used questionnaires to help you diagnose behavioral function, including questions about behavioral function, or the QABF, functional assessment screening tool, or the FAST, and the motivational assessment scale, or the MAS. They each serve essentially the same purpose, so it's unnecessary to use more than one. These data should also be graphed on a bar graph, since it does not depict changes in the behavior over time. The x-axis depicts the possible functions, and the y-axis is the average score, or total score, depending on the questionnaire, for each function. Scatterplot data help you identify if time of day, day of the week, or specific activities play a role in the occurrence of target behaviors. Scatterplots require someone to reliably collect data over the course of a week or more, so realistically, they may not be part of your initial assessment. Schools often keep an ongoing record of behavior that results in disciplinary action. If these data are available and the behaviors occur at a high enough frequency, enter them into a scatterplot to look for patterns. The image here is an example of a scatterplot over a 1-week period of behavior occurring with a preschool-age child. Data were collected at home, in the daycare setting, and in the community. No data were available from his preschool program. In analyzing these data, you can see the target behavior, tantrums, occurred across environments and was most consistently observed from 7 to 8 p.m. When looking at the data, ask the following questions. What time of day is the behavior least likely to occur? What is going on during that time? What time of day is the behavior most likely to occur? What is going on during that time? What day of the week is the behavior most likely to occur? Is there anything that happens differently on that day? The answers to these questions may provide valuable insight into factors that impact the learner's behavior. The next step is to put it all together to get a clear picture of when the behavior is most likely to occur. This step allows you to take an objective look at your data to form your hypothesis of the function of the target behaviors. Use the problem behavior pathway, pictured here, as a guide. The final column, the maintaining consequence, is the function of the target behavior, or what the learner gets by engaging in the behavior. Fill in each of the boxes using the patterns you found in the behavior data. When completing the problem behavior pathway, fill in the blanks for the following sentence. When blank happens, learner blank in order to blank. Include common setting events, as you will use this information when completing the competing behavior pathway in the next step. List the most common antecedents based on the data you collected. Include all the behaviors that occur in the context you're describing, even if they don't co-occur in every incident. Finally, describe the consequence that maintains the target behaviors. Here's an example of a completed problem behavior pathway for Joe Smith. Under setting events, the BCBA listed target behaviors are more likely to occur when Joe is hungry, especially if it has been longer than 2 hours since he last ate. Under triggering antecedents, the BCBA wrote, when Joe is asked to do something he doesn't want to do, such as take a bath, get dressed, clean up, or do homework, especially if he is already engaged in an activity he enjoys, such as watching TV, playing on the iPad, or building with Legos. Then under the problem behavior, the BCBA wrote, he engages in yelling, aggression, and property destruction. Finally, under the maintaining consequences, the BCBA wrote, to delay the task and access help and/or attention from his parents or siblings. If the learner engages in the same target behaviors in a different context, different antecedents and consequences, complete a separate pathway for that context. In the first example, the common setting event remains the same. The triggering antecedent is when Joe is told he can't have something he wants. The problem behavior is the same as the first example. He engages in yelling, aggression, and property destruction. And the maintaining consequence is to gain access to the item or activity he requested. The behavior stays the same, but the context in this example is different. If the learner engages in different target behaviors in another context, complete a separate pathway for those behaviors and the related context. In this example, the setting event again remains the same. The triggering antecedent is when attention is restricted away from Joe, such as when his parents are busy making dinner or helping his siblings. The problem behavior he is engaging in is SIB, usually headbanging, and the maintaining consequence is to gain access to his parents' attention. Avoid the temptation to complete this process for every possible behavior and context. The point of the exercise is to arrive at the most common context, but it's possible that to address the most serious behaviors, you may need to consider more than just one context. The competing behavior pathway is a visual representation of the learner's target behavior with the current maintaining variables and a more desirable pathway that includes functionally equivalent replacement behaviors. The pathway includes space for both the replacement behavior, which is an acceptable alternative to the target behavior, usually some type of communicative response that allows the learner to access the maintaining consequence, and the ultimately desired behavior, which is the terminal goal or response that will take the place of the target behavior. This often involves some sort of tolerance to an aversive situation, such as denied access. The top row of the pathway comes from the problem behavior pathway. List the most common setting event, antecedent, behaviors that occur in this context, and the maintaining consequence. In our example, under most common setting event, the BCBA wrote, target behaviors are more likely to occur when Joe is hungry, especially if it has been longer than 2 hours since he ate last. Under triggering antecedents, the BCBA wrote, when Joe is asked to do something he doesn't want to do, such as take a bath, get dressed, clean up, or do homework, especially if he is already engaged in an activity he enjoys, such as watching TV, playing on the iPad, or building with Legos. Then, under problem behavior, he engages in yelling, aggression, and property destruction. Finally, under maintaining consequences, to delay the task and access help and/or attention from his parents or siblings. The next step is to identify the replacement behavior. This might not be what you ultimately want the learner to do in this context, but it provides the learner with a better way to get what he or she wants without engaging in the target behavior. The behavior is an intermediate step to your goal. This should always directly relate to the function of the target behavior. In our example, the replacement behavior is to ask for 5 more minutes and/or help with the task. Finally, the bottom row of the pathway includes accommodations or interventions you recommend to help the learner make the leap from the replacement behavior to the desired behavior. In our example, the setting event accommodations are to allow Joe to access healthy snacks, such as fruits and vegetables, at will by placing them where he can access them independently. Our antecedent interventions include presenting demands using the Premack principle and using behavioral momentum when interrupting preferred activities. The ultimate desired behavior is for Joe to transition easily from preferred to non-preferred tasks. And the consequence intervention will be a DRA procedure, which will reinforce appropriate alternative responses to the target behavior. Do you see the beginning of the behavior plan unfolding here? After analyzing the data, it's time to write the FBA. Documenting the FBA might feel like a daunting task. You collected a lot of information, compiled it in meaningful ways, and analyzed it to identify the maintaining variables of the target behaviors. The good news is that you now have all the information you need, and you will just be plugging that information into a template. If you work for an agency, they likely have a template with their letterhead or branding that they want you to use. Most templates include the same or similar information, including demographic information, reason for referral, background information, information sources, indirect assessment details, direct assessment details, definition of target behaviors, learner strengths, a summary with the hypothesis statement, and recommendations. This is not a full behavior plan. Include some simple strategies the reader can use to minimize the impact of the target behaviors and any recommendations for future services. Make sure to download the FBA document for an example of what to include in your documentation. The sequence of the information may vary depending on what makes the most sense to you or your agency's template. Generally, as long as the information is there and easy to find, the order is unimportant. Think of it as telling a story about the learner as well as your process for identifying the function of the target behaviors and relevant replacement behaviors, as well as any recommended interventions. You want to include relevant details without adding extraneous information. Include details such as the description of the environment, number of people present and their relationship to the learner, overall activity and noise level of the environment if it's relevant, presence of any previously identified potential triggers, such as objects or people that might trigger behavior, any absence of any desired objects or people that might relate to the behavior, interactions between the learner and the environment or people, interactions between the other people in the environment that might be relevant, activities other people are engaging in that might be relevant, any relevant sensory stimulation in the environment, and the absence of preferred sensory stimulation if that's relevant. Avoid including any of these details if they don't appear to impact behavior. For example, if you're observing in the classroom setting and the teacher provides help to a student next to your learner and the learner does not react in any way, it's probably not relevant or necessary to include this in your documentation. If you're not sure a detail is relevant, go ahead and include it. In your documentation, don't include the names of other children outside of the family unit, such as peers at school. Subjective information, such as how you believe the learner felt, unless the learner reports a specific feeling. A complete chart of all ABC data collected, unless specifically requested by the funder. Irrelevant details about the learner's life, such as information about their pet goldfish they don't interact with. Your documentation should be both thorough and concise. Include enough information to describe the maintaining variables without adding any fluff. To use jargon or not to use jargon? That is the question. When writing your report, use language appropriate to your audience. Who will read your report? The most common audiences for your report will be funders or insurance companies, schools, parents, ABA professionals, and other professionals outside the field of ABA. While you want your report to appear professional, you also want the reader to understand what you write. This makes the language you choose incredibly important. If your report is intended primarily for other BCBAs or ABA professionals to help them understand the learner's behavior, it's fine to include jargon. If the report is intended for anyone outside the field, it's critical that you use common vernacular so the reader understands what you're saying. The report helps no one if the reader doesn't understand what you write. That was a quick overview of the initial behavioral assessment process. Now we will dive into the skills assessment. Your appearance has changed a bit, but you're still a dedicated BCBA who wants to master these important skills. A main component of your initial assessment is a skills assessment. Generally speaking, this assessment should help you identify skill deficits that might contribute to the learner engaging in the target behaviors that originally led the parents to seek out services. This is especially true if the service you're providing is paid for by an insurance company. Insurance companies require that the services provided be medically necessary and that it be the most cost-effective service. ABA, in the eyes of insurance companies, is best used to address maladaptive behavior. Conducting a skills assessment requires the following steps. Choosing an assessment. Conducting the assessment. Prioritizing target skills based on assessment results, and documenting the assessment or writing the treatment plan. The skills assessment involves fewer steps than the FBA, but it's critical to developing a comprehensive treatment plan. Learners engage in challenging behavior because they lack the skills they need to do better. As notable psychologist Dr. Ross Greene said, kids do well if they can. Dr. Stuart Ablon has a great TED Talk about this idea. I will link to the video in the resources section. He helps create a frame for thinking of challenging behavior as related to the learner's skill deficits. Adopting this frame before conducting a skills assessment encourages you to look for the connection between the learner's behaviors and skill deficits. I like to share this video with staff and parents to help them reframe the learner's challenging behaviors. If the learner could do better, he would, and it's our job to help the learner develop the skills he needs to do better. The first step is to collect background information. This information helps you prepare for the assessment. You get a general sense of the learner's strengths and specific areas of needs. Parents, caregivers, and other stakeholders have the opportunity to share their concerns. Look for information that influences the learner's behavior and the skill development. Consider the impact of the learner's past experiences on your current assessment. Here are a list of questions you should ask. Don't worry about writing them all down. Download the Skills Assessment Questionnaire in the Resources tab for a complete list. Who lives at home with the learner? If both parents don't live in the home, what are the custody arrangements, if any? What are the names and ages of the learner's siblings, if any? Does the learner have any history of abuse, neglect, or trauma? What first initiated the evaluations for a diagnosis? Does the learner have any medical concerns or additional diagnoses? Does the learner have any physical challenges that would prevent him from participating in services? Does the learner attend school? If yes, what type of supports does he or she receive? Does the learner have a history of engaging in risky behavior? Does the learner take any medications? What is the learner's history of services, including any services provided at school, including speech, occupational therapy, physical therapy, ABA, or other services? What is the learner's most pressing need at this time? How does the learner communicate? Describe the learner's interactions with others in the home. Does the learner participate in family activities such as having a meal, playing a game, completing chores, etc.? Describe any challenging behaviors that interfere with learning or participating with the family or at school. Much of this information will be included in reports from other providers, such as the IEP or the diagnostic assessment. Take the time with parents or caregivers to give them a voice in the assessment and to make sure all the information is accurate and up to date. If the learner has the ability, include him or her in the conversation. Let them speak about their experiences and goals. Numerous skills assessments are available to help you identify your learner's current abilities. The most common assessments used in ABA programs include the Verbal Behavior Milestones Assessment Placement Program, or the VB-MAP, the Assessment of Basic Language and Learning Skills Revised, or the ABLES-R, Promoting Emergence of Advanced Knowledge, or PEAK, Assessment of Functional Living Skills, or the AFLS, Essential for Living, or EFL, the Early Start Denver Model, or ESDM, the Vineland Adaptive Behavior Scales, 3rd edition, and social skills assessments such as the Triad Social Skills Assessment. This is not an exhaustive list of all possible assessments available to choose from. So with so many assessments available, how do you choose the right one? Each of these assessments looks at different skills and is appropriate for different ages and abilities. When choosing an assessment, ask yourself the following questions. Does the funder, such as the insurance company, school, or someone else, require specific assessments? What is the age or developmental level of the learner? What resources are available to you? And what types of skills are most important for the success of your learner, such as life skills, communication skills, or social skills? There is not one right assessment for each learner. Your comfort and ability to utilize an assessment is critical to the decision as well. Some of the assessments, such as ESDM, EFL, and PEAK, require training to implement with fidelity. The Vineland Adaptive Behavior Scales 3 requires an understanding of psychometric scoring or access to the online scoring platform, Q Global. Many of these assessments are expensive to purchase and may not be available through your agency. The table here compares some of the most common skills assessments used in ABA programs. This table is included in the Skills Assessment Workbook, which is available for download in the Resources tab, so you can revisit it at any time. Each assessment evaluates slightly different skills. This results in different programming for your learner once you complete the assessment. Choose the assessment that best aligns with your learner's goals and age. Some of the assessments are age-referenced, which means that it compares skills across typically developing children of the same age. Other assessments are criterion-referenced, which means they only assess the individual's progress against their own past performance. Criterion-referenced assessments do not provide a comparison to what other children of the same age are able to do. For these reasons, the VB-MAP and the ABLES tend to be the most widely used assessments. These two assessments are affordable, easy to use, and cover the most common skills related to challenging behaviors, including communication, social skills, and self-regulation skills. Use the decision tree here to help you choose an assessment that's right for your learner. This decision tree is also included in the workbook, so you can easily reference it when you need it. Generally speaking, you need only choose one assessment. Choose the one that best fits your learner, your skills, and your resources. As you get to know the learner matures, or you gain access to new resources, you may choose to change the assessment that you use. Most funders accept this, provided you include a justification for the change in the assessments. Many BCBAs develop their own process or style for conducting the initial assessment. Children coming in for an initial assessment often have little or no experience with ABA or the expectation that they demonstrate skills when asked. They don't know you, and if the assessment is conducted in a clinic, they don't know the environment. Many other barriers also impact your ability to accurately measure the learner's skills. Your assessment results might not be accurate because the learner is uncomfortable around new people or environments, exhibits oppositional behavior, doesn't understand the directions or language you use, isn't motivated to respond correctly, has never been away from the caregivers, hasn't generalized the skill to new stimuli, or has never been asked or expected to perform the skills being asked on demand. Although it might not be feasible, you often get the most accurate assessment results when the assessment occurs over the course of several days. This provides you the opportunity to build a relationship with the learner and establish some basic expectations. If this is not possible, here are a few ways to improve your assessment results. Ask the parent or caregiver to have the learner perform the tasks. Ask the parent or caregiver to bring familiar objects with them to the assessment. Conduct the assessment at home, even for center-based services. Or ask the parent or caregiver to send you a video of the learner communicating, playing, or engaging in specific skills. Your initial assessment results will rarely provide a truly accurate picture of all the learner is capable of. Learners who attend school or who have received ABA services in the past generally perform more accurately during the initial assessment. So what do you do if you believe you don't have an accurate assessment? Include in your documentation any barriers to obtaining an accurate representation of the learner's skills. Report what you did to attempt to overcome the barriers and state your plan to gather accurate baseline data for any additional goals prior to intervention. It's okay to report the data you collect, but it's important to make note if you believe the data might be inaccurate. For example, if the data don't align with what the parents report the learner is capable of, or what you read in your review of records. I'm going to pause again to give you another code word. This code word is barriers. Again, the second code word is barriers. Make sure to write this down. An indirect assessment is any assessment that doesn't involve you directly measuring the behavior or skill. Indirect assessments provide an alternative when the barriers discussed earlier prevent you from obtaining accurate assessment data. These assessments typically include rating scales completed by the parent or someone who knows the learner well, such as the Vineland Adaptive Behavior Scales 3. The Vineland 3 is one of the most widely used indirect assessments in ABA programs. Because it is an age-referenced assessment, it clearly demonstrates skill deficits which may relate to the occurrence of challenging behavior. The assessment includes a section for rating behavior and separates challenging behavior into 3 categories, including internalizing, externalizing, and critical behaviors. Indirect assessments provide insight into the learner's abilities, but are not always reliable. Some parents, caregivers, or teachers are better reporters than others. Although more time-consuming, the interview form may provide more accurate information as it provides the opportunity for you to clarify what each response should reflect. For example, the reporter should choose 2 only if the learner demonstrates the skill across people and environments, and choose 1 if the learner demonstrates the complete skill independently sometimes, such as washes his hands from beginning to end without help or prompts sometimes. East Idaho DDA provides a video of Joe Dixon, BCBA, conducting a training on the use of the Vineland 3. I will link to this resource in the Resources tab if you want help completing this assessment. The advantages of the Vineland 3 are that it's widely accepted by insurance companies, it's easier to administer, and it doesn't rely on the learner to demonstrate the skills with novel adults or in novel environments. The disadvantages of the Vineland 3 are that it provides limited guidance for programming, it requires an understanding of psychometric scoring if you're not using the online Q Global scoring portal, and it is not sensitive to small improvements in skills or challenging behavior. Other indirect assessments will share these characteristics. You should use an indirect assessment when the insurance company requires it. You can't obtain an accurate representation of the learner's skills due to challenging behavior occurring during sessions. Other assessments fail to capture meaningful deficits in the learner's repertoire, or you want to supplement direct assessments to look at a broader range of skills and behaviors. Indirect assessments provide insight into the learner's skills that you wouldn't have otherwise. That being said, they are often unreliable and must be used with caution and supplemented with direct assessments. Direct assessments are a critical part of developing an effective ABA program. They allow you to measure the learner's skills and test for generalization since the learner doesn't know you and may be unfamiliar with the environment. The better prepared you are for an assessment, the smoother the process will go. Planning the initial assessment involves reviewing documentation, scheduling the assessment appointments, gathering materials, and preparing the environment if that's possible. Before beginning any assessment, you must review all available documentation. This is part of the behavioral assessment process, so you might have already completed this step. Useful documentation includes intake forms, diagnostic assessment, previous assessments, the IEP, reports from other service providers such as speech, occupational therapy, physical therapy, etc., and any indirect assessment results. Scheduling enough time for the assessment minimizes any last-minute need to scramble for follow-up appointments. Young learners often perform best during appointments that are 2 hours or less in length. If you anticipate the assessment taking longer than this, it might be best to schedule multiple appointments. If you gather enough information during your first appointment, simply cancel the follow-up. The length of time required to conduct a full direct assessment varies depending on the developmental ability of the learner, the attention and cooperation of the learner, the presence of competing or interfering behaviors, your experience as a tester, your organization and the accessibility of materials in the environment, and distractions in the environment. An assessment with a learner who demonstrates few interfering behaviors and limited communication skills may take only an hour or 2. Generally, the more skills that you must test, the higher rate of interfering behavior and the lower level of attending or responding, the longer the assessment takes. The chart here provides some estimates for how long an initial direct skills assessment might take given the presentation of the learner. Times are estimated and not all different combinations of ages and abilities are represented. The chart should give you some idea of how long to expect the initial assessment to take. You can find this chart in the workbook to help you with planning your assessment. Different insurance companies allow for different lengths of assessments, and the chart above represents only the direct assessment portion. The rest of the assessment, including any indirect assessments, records review, and documentation of the treatment plan, will typically add 2 to 4 or more hours to the total time it takes to complete the assessment, depending on your proficiency with documentation. Consider if there are time-sensitive concerns with the learner. For example, if the learner may need support with feeding, schedule the appointment during mealtime. The materials you need for the initial assessment vary depending on the learner's needs, interests, age, and overall treatment goals. Generally, the materials you need include questionnaires such as the FAST, MASS, QABF, PLS, or Reinforcer checklist, pens or pencils, the assessment book, a notepad or paper and clipboard, any previously identified potential reinforcers or preferred toys or activities, and a variety of toys and/or games to stimulate interest and provide naturalistic assessment opportunities such as cars or trucks, books, blocks or Legos, pretend food, balls, bubbles, balloons, dolls, art materials such as paper, crayons, or markers, small animals, puzzles, counting bears with different size and color bears, beads, miniature common objects, shape sorter, dry erase board and markers, and laminated pictures. Despite your efforts to collect everything you could possibly need, you probably won't have everything you need or want. Stay flexible and be creative. If you're missing materials, consider using technology to test skills such as tacting, listener responding, or even matching or sorting skills. Many apps are readily available that provide quick access to materials and activities. Try Bitsboard or a similar app. Google Images is also a quick source of relevant stimuli. If you conduct the assessment in a clinical setting, preparing the environment leads to the best assessment outcomes. It helps you maximize your time with the learner. Each environment is a little different, but generally, to get the environment ready for the assessment, you should place some items in sight but out of reach, such as on high shelves or in clear containers. Remove clutter or distracting items. Place some items within easy reach to entice the learner to engage. And remove any potentially dangerous items such as staplers, brooms, scissors, etc., unless they will be needed during your assessment. Conducting the direct assessment requires patience, creativity, and problem solving. Your main goal is to get the learner to show you as many of his skills as he can in a short period of time. Given that you're a stranger, this is a daunting task. As with every other aspect of this process, the direct assessment appointment can be broken down into smaller steps, including engaging the parent or caregiver in conversations, which is about 10 to 15 minutes, developing rapport with the learner, which is another 10 minutes or more, exploration of the environment for another 20 to 30 minutes or more, probing skills generally takes 1 to 2 hours, data collection happens throughout, and then finally the follow-up with the parent or caregiver for another 10 to 15 minutes at the end of the appointment. The times listed here are estimates and vary on the needs of the learner as discussed earlier. Use these times as a guide for the relative proportion of time spent on each part of the assessment. There are many reasons to engage the parent or caregiver in conversation. This is your opportunity to establish their role in ABA services. If you whisk their child off to the treatment room or banish them to a different room of the house, you send the message that their role is limited. If you discuss parent training and include the parents in the assessment process, you send the message that their role is critical. The choice is obvious. During this conversation, take time to build rapport. Establish them as the experts on their child by asking questions such as, what are their goals for the treatment? What are their primary concerns? Does the learner have any activity or food restrictions? Observe the child and parent interactions. Ask questions about the commonality of the observed interactions. Discuss the assessment process by telling them how long you expect the assessment to last. The parent's role in the assessment, for example, can the parents observe or participate? What you will be doing during the assessment? Under what conditions the assessment will end early, for example, the learner becomes distressed or engages in dangerous behaviors, and if a follow-up assessment will be needed. Also provide any questionnaires to the parents along with a pen and instructions. If you work for an agency, they might provide you with additional required information you must convey to the parents before you begin the assessment. Most initial assessments are conducted by the BCBA who will be working with the child once treatment begins. Begin by building rapport with the learner. You want the learner to see you as the source of reinforcement and feel comfortable enough to show you what they know. Create an environment where the learner is engaged and excited to be with you. Break out as many fun, interesting, and exciting activities as needed to engage the learner. Be silly and follow the learner's lead. Allow the learner to freely explore the environment. This also allows you to conduct free operant preference assessments and observe the learner's play and leisure skills. Engage in parallel play or attempt to enter their play. Resist the urge to jump right in to asking questions. Observe the learner's natural communication skills, willingness to allow you to interact or be near him, and any spontaneous skills such as matching, puzzles, motor imitation, or imaginative play. Once you build a rapport and allow the learner to explore the environment, it's time to start probing skills. This is the part you probably think of when you think about conducting a skills assessment. During this portion of the assessment, test the learner's abilities to perform the different tasks listed in the assessment you chose. Present each task and provide the learner a chance to respond. Make note of whether or not the learner responded correctly. Present the tasks in any sequence. Generally, it's best to follow the learner's lead and present tasks as the opportunity arises. For example, the learner begins playing with a train set. Present some listener responding or tacting tasks related to the trains. The table here shows the skills probed during 3 of the most common assessments used in ABA programs. This table is included in the Skills Assessment Workbook, which is available for download in the Resources tab, so you can look at it more closely when you're getting ready for your assessment. Good Behavior Beginnings has a video that provides a demonstration of the VB-MAP assessment conducted with a 2-year-old. I will link to this video in the Resources tab as well. During the assessment, it's not necessary to present every task in the assessment. Probe more advanced skills, such as listener responding in a messy field of 10, and work backward if it seems like the learner might succeed. If the learner fails to perform the task, refrain from teaching the skill and simply represent the task in a different way during a separate opportunity. For example, you want to test the learner's listener skills in a field of 4, but the learner did not select the picture of the car when you presented 4 images. Don't point to the correct response. Simply wait a while and represent the task in a different way, such as using objects or changing the SD. Continue presenting tasks until the end of the scheduled assessment time. The learner demonstrates skills across all testing areas. The learner meets predetermined behavioral criteria to end the session, or the learner stops responding. If necessary, schedule a follow-up assessment session. While you don't need to present every task in the assessment, you do need to complete enough to identify relevant skill deficits, especially those that may relate to target behaviors. Collect data throughout your assessment. Jot down anecdotal information that might be useful in the narrative part of your report. Document words or phrases the learner uses along with the related context. Make note of the learner's favorite toys or activities. Document any social interaction, social play, or social initiation. Note if the learner uses the bathroom, washes their hands, or has something to eat. Record the learner's response to demands. The VB-MAP scoring supplement, pictured here, was created by Amaris DePuglia, MD, BCBA, and Linda Franchuk, BS, LED, of the Patent Autism Initiative. This fabulous tool provides a detailed breakdown of the scoring for each skill in the VB-MAP. It is a printable PDF that provides space and prompts to assign different point values depending on the learner's performance. You can find the link to access this in the Resources tab. Generally, data collected during an initial assessment consists primarily of a messy collection of notes and tallies that you sort through once the learner leaves the session and you begin documentation. When you finish probing skills, it's time to follow up with the parent or caregiver. Discuss the following. Ask clarifying questions about what you observed. Are observed behaviors or responses common? Do the parents observe the learner demonstrating skills not demonstrated during the assessment? Discuss your likely recommendations for services, including the frequency and duration of sessions, location of services, and a quick overview of possible treatment priorities. Discuss the parent's role in ABA services, such as parent training, consistency of services, planning and decision-making. Discuss the next steps, including any follow-up assessments or additional information needed, the timeline for documentation completion and submission, and the approximate timeline for approval. Now that you have collected a wealth of information about your learner, it's time to start making some decisions. Prioritize skills that are directly related to target behaviors, such as manding and self-management, that are prerequisites for replacement behaviors, that allow the learner to access reinforcers in the natural environment, and that allow the learner greater independence. Generally, in your treatment plan, you want to address skill deficits that relate to the target behaviors and promote independence. When a learner encounters reinforcement in the natural environment, they are more likely to engage in prosocial behavior. Keep these ideas in mind when choosing skills for your plan. Consider including skills in the following areas. Manding. How will the learner communicate what he or she wants or needs? Tacting. How will the learner engage in joint attention? Intraverbals. How will the learner develop more complex communication skills? Play and leisure. How will the learner engage in appropriate activities when attention is restricted? Social skills. How will the learner appropriately obtain attention from peers and navigate complex social interactions? Self-management. How will the learner tolerate demands or delays to reinforcement? How will the learner tolerate denied access or restricted attention? Reinforcer effectiveness. How will the learner develop more effective or readily available reinforcers? Self-care. How will the learner develop new feeding, bathing, toileting, and dressing skills? And academics, if appropriate. How will the learner meet IEP goals or tolerate academic demands? A good rule of thumb is one skill acquisition program for each hour of treatment. For example, if you recommend 20 hours of direct RBT services, you should include 20 skill acquisition programs. It's often appropriate to have multiple goals within one skill acquisition area, such as multiple social or manding goals. For example, mands for a break and mands with attributes. Use the assessment as a guide to help you choose appropriate goals and targets, but avoid the temptation to teach to the test by only selecting goals that help the learner achieve the next milestone on the assessment. Focus on helping the learner overcome the deficits that lead them to relying on challenging behavior. The final step in the initial assessment process is to document the results. If you're seeking approval from an insurance company, you will write a thorough treatment plan. If you completed the assessment for another purpose, such as a school or private contract, you might need to include slightly different information in your treatment plan. Treatment plans generally include client information, provider information, assessment information, medical rationale for ABA services, coordination of treatment with other providers, the behavior intervention plan, behavior reduction goals, the crisis plan, skills assessment, progress toward current replacement behaviors and skill acquisition goals, parent or caregiver participation, monitoring of the plan, treatment integrity, generalization and maintenance procedures, discharge criteria, and projected duration of ABA services, summary of medical necessity criteria, summary of treatment recommendations, and parent or caregiver informed consent. That was a long list, but don't worry, you already have all the information you need and we'll just plug the information into a template. I'm going to quickly go through each section, but you can download the sample treatment plan from the Resources tab for a closer look. The first section generally contains simple demographic information. This allows the funder to quickly compare your information with theirs. Include the learner's name, date of birth, age, diagnosis, guardian's phone number, and address. The provider information section is again simple demographic information for quick reference. Include the provider's name, number associated with the funder if applicable, phone number, address, and email. The assessment information section should include basic information about when and who conducted the assessment. This is for a quick reference for the funder and should include anticipated start date of services, initial assessment date, date of the current report, and the evaluator's name. If services are funded by the learner's medical insurance, complete this section thoroughly and carefully. This is one of the most important sections when attempting to justify the services are medically necessary. Include psychosocial information, including who lives in the home, siblings and their ages, any custody concerns, any history of abuse, neglect, or trauma, school and child care arrangements, including reported challenges in those settings, medical information, or other health concerns, why the family originally sought a diagnosis, a risk assessment, the diagnosis, a prescription for ABA services. Some funders will require that you attach the prescription, any medications, a history of services, including services provided at school and a history of ABA services, current areas of need, including adaptive behaviors, communication skills, and maladaptive behaviors. Most funders require you to coordinate treatment with the learner's other healthcare providers. This coordination ensures a fluidity of treatment and leads to the best outcomes for learners. The funder also wants to ensure that none of the services are duplicated or redundant. Include your plan to coordinate care with the learner's school, doctor, psychiatrist, occupational therapist, speech therapist, physical therapist, and support staff. Although it's often best to incorporate the behavior plan into the body of your treatment plan, most funders will accept an attached behavior plan. At minimum, make sure that your plan includes a goal, target behavior definitions, antecedent interventions, skill development interventions, consequence interventions, additional strategies or recommendations, and the response to target behaviors. This section will be covered more thoroughly in our course on writing a behavior intervention plan. Include a section on behavior reduction goals and progress toward behavior reduction goals. This section is generally a table that includes a simple list of each behavior with the baseline data, current levels if it's a reassessment, short-term goals, long-term goals, and any progress toward behavior reduction goals. Include this section only for reassessments. This should include data for each target behavior along with a description of progress or an explanation as to why the behavior may have increased. For each behavior, include the definition, baseline data, current level, and a graph. Narrative describing progress or a lack of progress and any changes to the previous plan to address the lack of progress, and make sure that any data reported appear in the same format. For example, rate, duration, etc. The crisis plan describes what a crisis looks like for your learner and what procedures will be implemented if your learner enters a crisis. Customize the crisis plan to your unique learner. Your company's template might include a generic crisis plan, but it's important that this part of the plan be specific to your learner's needs. Include risk factors, when to implement the crisis plan, how to secure the environment, any approved restrictive procedures such as safety care, and who to contact following the use of the crisis plan. A bulk of your assessment will be covered in the skills assessment section. It's important to be thorough in your description of the assessment procedures and results. Include which assessments were used, a description of the assessments, and a visual depiction of assessment results, such as the VB-MAP chart. New goals to address skill deficits, often presented in a chart with a goal, rationale, and baseline data. These goals should be specific and measurable. Some funders prefer or require you to include a rationale for each of the program goals that explains why the goal meets criteria for medical necessity. Include the progress toward current replacement behaviors and skill acquisition goals section only for reassessments. It generally includes a combination of a chart and graphs for each of the learner's current programs. The chart should include skill area, current goal, progress or current level, status of the goal, mastered or in treatment, date of expected mastery, typically 6 months from the assessment date, any new goal that will take the place of this goal if the status is mastered, and a graph for each goal. Your agency's template might look different and include slightly different information. Different funders might have different requirements, but generally you want this section to be reflective of progress toward clients' long-term goals and a continued need for services. Most funders require the parents or caregivers participate in services. This participation provides the greatest chance for long-term success and most efficient use of funds. Funders care about the learner's progress, but they want to ensure the services don't last forever. Parent training provides an opportunity to teach stakeholders about how to address the learner's needs without lifelong ABA services. Generally include at least 3 parent training goals. This section should include a narrative of the parent's participation in parent training, including any barriers to the parent's participation, a description of each goal, baseline and or current level for each goal if this is a reassessment, and a graph of data collected if it's another reassessment. The section for monitoring the plan describes your role in ensuring the ongoing success of the plan. These are strategies you will utilize to make sure your plan is carried out as intended. Include a description of how you will teach others to implement the plan and monitor the data collected. Treatment integrity is critical because the treatment plan can only be effective if it's implemented as planned. Include the treatment integrity section only for reassessments. This section allows you to report any integrity or fidelity data you collected during the treatment period. Include both a description of acceptable integrity criteria and a graph depicting data collected for each RBT working with the learner. Generalization and maintenance ensure the long-term success of your learner. Your overall goal for services should include a plan to help the learner overcome existing obstacles so he or she experiences success in the natural environment. This section allows you to describe your plan to ensure the learner demonstrates skills taught outside the treatment environment. Include a rationale for your chosen interventions. ABA services are not intended to be a lifelong intervention. When billing for services to insurance companies, you should address the presenting problem or the reason the parents originally sought services, then discharge. If the parents identify new challenges following discharge, they should seek to resume services. Funders want to know your plan for discontinuing services. Describe the plan for titrating services and the ultimate criteria for discharge. This should be unique for your specific learner and should not simply be that he or she will be indistinguishable from their peers. Each funder publishes the criteria for ABA services to be considered a medically necessary service on their website. Generally, if you Google medical necessity plus ABA plus whatever the funder's name is, you will find it easily. This section should describe how the learner meets each of the funder's published criteria. In the next section, describe the services you recommend based on all the information you provide earlier in your plan. Include service location, such as the home, clinic, or school, schedule of services, treatment hours requested including the service code, modifier, description of the service, total units requested, a unit is typically 15 minutes, and hours of per week on average, plus the location of each type of service. The final piece is critically important. Review your plan thoroughly with the parents and client if appropriate. The parents should understand any and all potential risks and benefits to treatment. The plan should include a signature from the BCBA, parents, and the client if that's appropriate. You completed the assessment and wrote an amazing treatment plan. Now the real work of treatment begins. While waiting for the funder to approve services, continue to plan how those services will be implemented by staff and what steps you must take to be ready for services to begin. Before services start, choose a teaching methodology such as DTT, NET, PRT, incidental teaching, direct instruction, precision teaching, etc., that best meets the needs of this specific learner. Collect necessary teaching materials including stimuli, communication materials such as PECs, reinforcers, etc. Consider necessary environmental modifications. Research any client-specific interventions or considerations, and seek mentorship to support any aspect of the plan you want more experience with. Seeking support and mentorship is a sign of strength, not weakness. It shows you want to continue to learn and grow. Join the conversation in our Facebook group, Master ABA for Professionals, to ask questions or connect with other professionals. I will put links to the group in the resources section. Before we end, I want to give you the last code word. This one is support. Again, the final code word is support. You made it all the way to the end of the course. Congratulations. Don't forget to download all the course resources in the Resources tab. I hope you found this course helpful. Please take a minute to complete the survey in the next lesson. Make sure to complete the quiz in that Mission Accomplished lesson as well in order to receive your CEU certificate. If you have any questions, reach out at any time to support@masteraba.com. Thank you.